Hey everybody, Bearded Rogue here, and today I want to talk about something that I just did for the first time ever this weekend, and that's print and plays. I have a lot of games that I've designed. I talk about that in another video earlier this month, and games that I'm working on designing. So print and plays are becoming something that's much larger a concern for me than it ever has been. The first game that I designed, Elements, I never really built a print and play for. I printed up my own copies and sent them to people if I wanted people to be able to play it. I never tried to put together a series of files, and we'll get back to that in a second, that would allow people to build my game completely independently of me being there and try it and play it and tell me what they thought. So, what I've discovered on this journey is a couple of things, and I'm going to kind of outline those here. And I would love feedback from anybody, whether they've tried my print and play or not, or whether they've put together their own print and plays in the past, or if they have a habit or are fond of putting together print and plays. I want as much feedback as I possibly can here, because this is an area that I found that I was really, really lacking in information on the second I started trying to do it. So, the first thing you have to do is you need to get your components together. And there's some debate on what components actually need to be present in a print and play, and what should you expect to have people have on hand. And the debate is really kind of all over the place. What I ended up settling on was kind of a compromise. The game that I did a print and play for, Build the Robots, has a lot of cards. And cards are the easiest thing to print and play, for the most part. Especially if you print them all in a, 9 to a page format, or an 8 to a page format if you're doing front and back of each card. There's all sorts of ways that you can make that easier for people. Cards are relatively easy. The first consideration about cards is, one, how much ink does this use? Fewer people are going to use a print and play that requires their entire ink cartridge to print. So trying to minimize the amount of ink you're using is a good idea. This means functional cards over pretty cards is probably better, at least for an initial print and play, especially if there may still be changes to the design. Functional is better, so stick with functional. Don't use a lot of color. Make it so that people can print it in black and white or grayscale. Color ink is much more expensive, so this is kind of piggybacking on the previous answer, is that you want to use functional cards that don't use a lot of ink, and you want to use the least amount of colored ink as possible. If this means you have to make some changes to the cards, like adding labels to things that you wouldn't normally add, that you would only be using color for, then do so. This brings up the next thing, color blindness options. Black and white are pretty much universally okay. Various shades of gray are pretty much universally okay. The second you start throwing reds and greens and blues and oranges and other colors in, you need to start thinking about color blindness considerations. And there's all sorts of people on the web talking about this, but, Ticket to Ride and various other games have already solved this for you. Symbol plus color. Every symbol should have its own every color should have its own distinct symbol that it's attached to, always, 100% of the time, so that even if people cannot differentiate the colors, they can differentiate them by symbols. This is, again, not a new concept, but something to keep in mind. In my case, there wasn't anything on my cards that really needed to be differentiated by color. All of the cards are broken up into various decks. However, I was able to just put a one-word or word and a number summary of which deck those cards belong to. So if the city cards were part of the Asia continent deck, I just put the word Asia on them so that you can sort them later. In my personal prototype copy, all of the I use colors as well as symbols for all of that. So it says Asia, and then all Asia cards are red. North America, all cards are blue, etc., etc. So, you can do that. One way to help people with this, if you are encouraging them to print and play, is go ahead and leave everything low ink, but you can always print on whatever color paper you want. And this is a good way and cheaper way to differentiate things if you're planning on using color as a keyword. So like if your cards should be blue, all your North America cards should be blue, put blue paper. You know, that light blue robin's egg paper into the printer, and then print your same basic generic grayscale functional cards onto that paper. That appears to be the best thing for me, as far as I'm concerned. So the first thing is any components that they need that they wouldn't be able to get a hold of normally. So this includes things like boards, score trackers are potentially important, but they're somewhat optional if they have other score tracker abilities around, or if they're willing to use pen and paper. Unless your game uses custom dice, you do not need to give people dice faces. If you do use custom dice, you can give them the die faces and have them print on things, or you could just give them a chart telling them, you know, 1 equals this, 2 equals this, 3 equals this. Now, they'd have to reference the chart while playing, but if you make it clear that the final version of the game will use custom dice, some people are willing to do that. So that eliminates dice faces as something you have to print out. Tokens. Tokens are interesting, unless your tokens are required to be a certain type of thing. Double-sided tokens, I've found, are the most pain in the butt for people. Most people aren't carrying around a bunch of tokens that are one color on one side and one color on the other. Other than Othello pieces, and if you have to have player colors mixed in, that really doesn't work either. So, in my print and play, because I have robot tokens, the robots that you create are either plastic robots or steel robots, and in my prototype version of the game, they're double-sided. Now, my prototype version of the game uses the most basic thing possible. I just have squares of foam, of craft foam, and I put an S on one side to denote that those are the steel robots. So if the S is face up, it's a steel robot. If the S is not visible, it's a plastic robot. So I just use craft foam. However, since this was a complicated thing to expect people to just have on hand, I went ahead and added those to my print and play. And this is where I talk about, I created the mandatory file, which includes cards, and then the optional file, which is things like tokens. Another thing is, in my game, the cities each have their own conquer cost, and the continent has its break point, which is just the cumulative number, like the addition of all of the conquer costs on cities that are currently visible. This is a number that's fairly easy to keep track of in your head a lot of the time. Some of my friends, you know, it's a number between 3 and 15, and anytime a card leaves the tableau, you adjust it accordingly. Some of my friends are able to keep this in their head with absolutely no problems. Other people really appreciate having some sort of a physical tracker that tells them what the current breakpoint is. I know that this came up in my group with Smash Up as well, and I know in later Smash Up expansions they added tokens and stuff like that to help you keep track of the breakpoints and how close everything was to breaking. So the continents now, in the optional section, there is a breakpoint card, which has a 1 through 15, and then the name of the continent is also in there. And you just need one marker, and you set that to whatever the current breakpoint for that continent is. Again, completely optional. Some people can do it in their head, some people may not want to. So I took it out of the main file and put it into the optional file. The next thing is the rules document. The rules document for your game is very important regardless of whether you're doing a print and play or not. It is usually the first thing that I spend time on trying to create the game. However, it's also usually the last thing I work on when I'm creating a game. Putting it in front of playtesters is a really good way to find out what's not in your rules, what doesn't work, because you can't be packaged in your game to teach everybody how to play it. So you have to have the rules do that. And one of the things I found out early on is I uploaded my print and play, and then realized how much of my teaching is visual. I hoped to include videos of, this is how you set the game up, this is how you play, and all of that stuff. However, other than a fixed position camera with my phone, I haven't been able to figure out a way that doesn't create shaky cam nausea. So I haven't been able to do that yet. So instead, I had to start taking pictures, and then diagramming on those pictures, hey, this is how you set up for one player. This is how you set up a continent. This is how you set up the whole board. And I probably need to add even more pictures, like a picture of a flow of a player's turn, step by step, would probably be something that's useful. As it is, I've uploaded the new, including pictures, version of the rules document, and I expect that document to change the most out of anything else I've uploaded. Your rules document will probably be the document that changes the most during playtesting, especially if you've done a lot of playtesting yourself. Build the Robots has about 25 playtests in at this point, which isn't a lot, but is a lot more than I normally do before I start farming it out to other people. I'm not expecting a lot of rules changes. I may be totally kidding myself here, but or not rules changes. I'm not expecting a lot of components changes. There may be some wording changes here and there. There may be there probably will be some rules changes, but I don't expect the components to change all that much. So that's a big deal. So the rules document. So you need a rules document, you need the mandatory components, you need an optional components file if your game has a few other things that people may or may not want to print out. The final thing that you need, and this is something that's completely unique to a print and play, is a document that tells people how to build the print and play. It has to have a list of all the components that they need to have on hand, what kind of tokens they need. If you can give them suggestions about games that they might be able to pillage for parts for your print and play. For example, my game, Build the Robots, uses 1 money and 3 money pieces. The most popular game I could find that used 1 money and 3 money pieces is Seven Wonders. It happens to not use exactly the same amount of money that my game uses as far as total components go. However, it actually uses more money because it uses more 3 pieces and fewer 1 pieces. So Seven Wonders is perfect. If you have Seven Wonders, you have all of the money pieces that you will need to play Build the Robots. You don't need to look any further afield or find cubes or do anything fancy. You can just take those. Again, those are still options. You can use any kind of money you want. You could use just plain poker chips and decide that these are 1s and these are 3s. However, your audience has to be told how many of those items they need. My game also uses, as 2 resources, plastic and steel. And those need to be differentiated from each other. It really doesn't matter what type of piece you use, discs, cubes, whatever you want. As long as plastic is identifiable to everyone playing the game as plastic, and steel is identifiable to everyone playing the game as steel, and you can't confuse the two, you're golden. So there's no need to really go in depth on, this is what exactly the type of piece you need. No, just you need this many, and you need to make sure that it's different from this other type. I tried to use things that tried to use quantities of things that aren't very large. The game obviously has to have as much as it can have. And in a 4-player game, you may run up against the counts, but that's one of the other reasons that we playtest, and one of the things that will be really useful in a print and play is if any of the groups ever run out of resources, or if the groups feel that they just have too many resource cubes on hand and they never use all of them. That's something to know as far as your game goes. You may be able to pare down or be forced to add components to the game, which is something that's very vital to find out in playtesting. So just instructions on how to build it. Like, tell them which documents they absolutely need, which documents are optional. It helps if you title the documents that way. It also helps if the build document, the one that tells them how to build your print and play, is labeled some way to indicate that they need to read that one first, so that they aren't opening up all of the documents and going, wait a minute, none of this makes sense. So these are just a few things that I've discovered from my first print and play. Like, completely separate from anything that I learn as the print and play is now out in the wild and people are interacting with it. Just keep all of this stuff in mind. It's a print and play is actually a very interesting exercise to go through, whether anybody ever downloads it or not, because it gives you a lot of clarity on where your game is and how crystal you are on how your game works. Anyway, this has been 15 minutes of me talking about print and plays. I hope it has been valuable. I expect that as Build the Robots gets more interaction with people out there, and as other people play the print and play, or as other people watch this video and come up with things that they feel need to be added, please do. I would love to hear any comments you have on print and play advice, or good print and plays that you've encountered, like ones that are set up well, that made it very friendly for you to use it. I really would love to kind of gather a repository of information on how print and plays should be built in the community, so that they encourage players to use them, and so that they're useful for the designers as well, and don't have us wasting a lot of time building things that either aren't necessary or focusing on the wrong things. Anyway, that's Bearded Rogue. I'm going to let you go, and hope to talk to you soon. Bye.